A nurse finds strange medical practices and reports an untouchable surgeon, but she is fired and silenced. From exile, she gathers proof, allies, and courage. She returns, sneaks into the hospital to recover key files, and exposes the corruption. In the end, she faces him before the board, winning justice, reforms, and her good name back. Elena's routine at the hospital had always been the same. Halls lit with cold light, patients waiting for care, and a medical team that seemed to work like a well-oiled machine. But under that perfect image, she started to notice signs that didn't fit: missing medical records, treatments prescribed without reason, and surgeries billed at huge costs that didn't match reality. At first, each detail seemed like a simple administrative mistake, but as they piled up, doubt turned into an uncomfortable certainty. Something bigger was hidden behind those anomalies. Elena was known for being meticulous and committed. She could see the invisible signs that others preferred to ignore. One night on duty, while reviewing a record that seemed altered, she realized the pattern was too clear. The same surgeon appeared in most of these cases. A prestigious man, untouchable inside the institution, feared even by his colleagues. No one dared question him, because his name meant power, influence, and strong connections at the top of the hospital. Elena began making small notes, almost in secret. She kept copies of prescriptions, compared surgery reports, checked medical bills. She discovered patients listed as operated who had never entered an operating room, and others charged for materials and medicines that didn't exist. It was a system designed to enrich a few, and behind it was the doctor whose public image looked flawless. She tried to talk with some co-workers, but fear ruled. "Don't get involved in that," a colleague told her, avoiding eye contact. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Every attempt to share her findings ended in warnings disguised as advice. It was like talking to a wall. The entire hospital seemed to conspire in silence, more worried about protecting its reputation than about the truth. The pressure grew heavier when Elena tried to send a preliminary report to her superiors. The document was received with an awkward smile and filed away without comments. Days later, someone quietly suggested she stop asking questions if she wanted to stay safe. That was the first hard blow. It wasn't an isolated mistake, it was an organized cover-up. Elena understood she was alone. The weight of her suspicions grew each day and, although her conscience demanded action, she feared for her career, her safety, even her life. It wasn't easy to confront a doctor supported by authorities and protected by collective silence. Every step took her deeper into dangerous ground, but walking away was not an option. She had seen too much to pretend nothing was happening. The nights grew longer. She kept papers in hidden folders, saved digital copies on her personal computer, and replayed in her mind what she had discovered. She knew the hospital's silence wasn't accidental. It was fear, it was complicity, it was proof that the doctor's power reached every corner. What began as suspicion became an ethical obsession, and though the pressure mounted, so did her conviction that she had to take a stand. Elena gathered her courage and filed her complaint. It was not an impulsive act. She had spent sleepless nights reviewing every document, writing a clear and precise report, convinced that the evidence would speak for itself. She handed it to the hospital's administration committee, hoping it would finally start a serious investigation. But the response was quick and brutal. In less than a week, she was called to the director's office and told her services were no longer needed. The official reason was cold: internal restructuring. But everyone knew her dismissal was no coincidence. The blow was devastating. She walked out of the hospital feeling that justice had turned to smoke in her hands. Her uniform, once a symbol of pride and vocation, now felt like a mark of betrayal by the institution. In the hallways, no one said goodbye. The silence, along with the averted looks, made it clear. Nobody wanted to be seen supporting her. Soon, rumors began to spread. Fake stories circulated among colleagues and acquaintances that Elena had made medical mistakes, that she behaved inappropriately with patients, that her dismissal was due to incompetence. None of it was true, but the strategy was clear: destroy her reputation. What they couldn't silence with threats, they tried to bury under a storm of lies. The isolation was complete. Her friends inside the hospital stopped answering her messages. Some even crossed the street to avoid greeting her. The loneliness was heavier than losing her job. Elena realized she hadn't just been fired. She was being erased from the professional world. Every job application she sent was rejected without explanation. The shadow of that powerful doctor followed her to every interview. Her nights, once filled with reviewing records, turned into long hours of insomnia. She replayed everything in her head, sometimes doubting herself. Had she done the right thing by speaking up? Would it have been easier to close her eyes like everyone else? But whenever doubt tried to break her, she remembered the faces of deceived patients, the unfair bills that ruined families, the deaths that might have been avoided. That memory was her anchor, stopping her from giving up. The pressure grew stronger. One day she found her mailbox full of anonymous letters calling her disloyal and a liar. Another day, when leaving home, she saw her car scratched with insults. The message was clear. They wanted to scare her, crush her, and force her into silence. Yet, fear turned into a quiet flame inside her. The injustice she faced was proof that she was hitting a nerve. The power of that doctor was not built on truth, but on fear and corruption. And if they were working so hard to destroy her, it meant what she had discovered was very important. Elena knew she couldn't stay still. Even if everything seemed lost, even if the hospital had shut its doors, she still had the most important thing: her determination to go all the way. They had taken her uniform, but not her voice or her conscience. And though she was alone, she knew she had to continue. Losing her job didn't just take Elena away from the hospital. It also forced her to leave the city. The pressure grew so intense that she realized staying meant putting herself at greater risk. She found refuge in a small town where nobody knew her. There, in the quiet and distance, she began slowly rebuilding herself. What first felt like exile soon became a chance to prepare a counterattack. Elena understood that if she wanted to expose the surgeon and those protecting him, she needed more than words. She needed undeniable proof, documents that could not be denied, evidence that clearly showed how the truth was manipulated inside the hospital. So she began patient, detailed work, tracking medical records, contacting former patients, digging into files many thought had disappeared. Her first shock came when she discovered medical records erased from the official system. Patients with serious diagnoses had simply vanished from the digital archive. Thanks to copies some families kept, Elena could compare differences. Treatments recorded in personal papers did not appear in the hospital files, as if they had never happened. This wasn't a mistake. It was a way to hide medical errors and, in some cases, deaths that were never investigated. Next, she focused on the financial side. Through invoices still circulating among outside suppliers, she found inflated purchases. Sutures billed at 3 times their value, medications charged but never delivered, surgical supplies listed for operations that never took place. The money trail was clear. Corruption wasn't just harming patients' health. It was draining the resources meant to save lives. The hardest part was facing cases of suspicious deaths. Mothers, children, and elders who entered the hospital with treatable conditions ended up dying without clear explanations. Families had searched for answers, but always faced the same wall: silence, vague excuses, and medical certificates stating unspecific causes. Elena gathered testimonies in hushed voices, recordings made in living rooms where grief mixed with anger and resignation. Each story became another brick in the wall of evidence she was building. The work was exhausting and dangerous. Every call she made, every file she recovered, brought her closer to a truth many wanted buried. Yet exile also gave her clarity. Far from the noise and direct pressure, she could piece together a puzzle that had seemed impossible to solve inside the hospital. She soon realized this wasn't an isolated error or a single case. It was an entire system built to get rich at the cost of patients' health and lives. The surgeon wasn't acting alone, but he was the key piece. The visible face of a cover-up machine that included hospital directors and administrators. Elena organized everything with strict discipline. Paper folders locked away, digital copies encrypted in the cloud, notes only she could understand. She knew that if anyone discovered what she was doing, her life could be in danger. But she also knew that if she stopped, no one else would continue. Justice depended on her strength. Her days in exile became a mix of solitude and intense work. She had lost much, but now she had something she hadn't before: solid evidence. Every deleted record recovered, every inflated bill logged, every testimony from grieving families brought her closer to her bigger goal. What once were only suspicions had now become tangible proof. And even though she didn't yet know how or when she would take the next step, Elena was certain she would not rest until the truth came to light. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and leave a like so more people can discover it. Your support is what keeps this narrative alive. Let's continue. Elena had managed to collect a solid file, full of documents and testimonies, but she knew it was still not enough. She might hold the truth in her hands, but what good was it if no one listened? She was aware she was facing a powerful doctor and a whole network of complicity. At that critical moment of loneliness, people began to appear. People who, like her, had decided not to stay silent. The first was a patient, an older man who had heard about her dismissal and went looking for her. He arrived with an envelope under his arm. Copies of bills and prescriptions that didn't match what he had actually received during his stay at the hospital. His daughter had kept everything for years, convinced something was wrong with the charges. That testimony became the spark. Elena realized she was not as alone as she thought. Over time, more patients joined in. A mother who lost her son after a suspicious surgery. A worker who paid for a treatment he never received. A woman who kept certificates with contradictory diagnoses. All of them carried scars, some on their bodies, others in their hearts, but they shared the same need to be heard. Elena welcomed them one by one, writing down their stories, cross-checking their data, and expanding the map of corruption she had begun to draw. The second ally came almost by chance. An investigative journalist, known for his sharp style and ability to uncover uncomfortable truths, heard about the situation. He didn't look for her because he believed the rumors, but because he doubted them. They met in a quiet cafe, and after seeing her evidence, he realized he was holding an explosive case. He offered her something she had lacked until then, a way to make the truth public. But he also warned it would not be easy. Publishing such a case could mean lawsuits, threats, and a direct confrontation with hidden powers. Even so, he accepted the risk. The third support came unexpectedly. A young lawyer, experienced in human rights cases, took an interest. Her ethical commitment was clear. She was not after fame or money, but justice. Elena showed her the documents, and the lawyer confirmed that what they had was not only a moral problem, but a crime. Embezzlement, medical negligence, systematic cover-up. She explained that with strong evidence and well-protected testimonies, they could start a legal process capable of breaking through walls of silence. With these three pillars, the patients, the journalist, and the lawyer, Elena began to feel that her fight was no longer individual. The truth was no longer only in her hands. Now it was shared, protected, and defended by others. The loneliness of exile transformed into a small circle of resistance, where every voice added strength. Meetings became frequent. Around dining tables, in improvised offices, in quiet cafes, they planned strategies. The journalist asked for verifiable details, the lawyer checked every document with legal precision, and the patients told their stories with tears and anger. Everything pointed to the same center, the untouchable surgeon and the web of complicity around him. The courage of these allies also carried risks. Elena knew that by giving them visibility, she was putting at risk people who had already suffered enough. That's why they designed a careful plan. Protect identities, encrypt information, and secure copies in different places. If the hospital tried to silence them again, it would not be able to erase everything. Elena, who once felt abandoned by the whole world, now found in these allies a reflection of her own strength. They were not perfect heroes, they were ordinary people with wounds, but that gave them real courage. Together, they were no longer isolated victims, but a force capable of challenging power. With the evidence she had gathered and the support of her allies, Elena knew it was time to return to the hospital. Not as a nurse, not as an employee, but as an investigator determined to rip out the lies at their root. The journalist insisted the testimonies were powerful, and the lawyer repeated that the material was solid, but one key piece was missing: the internal files that could prove, from within the institution itself, the true reach of the corruption. Elena designed a calculated plan. She spent weeks studying entrances, schedules, and security protocols. She still remembered the hallways, the distracted guards, the offices where documents were stored, the computers connected to internal servers. Every detail became part of a mental map that now turned into strategy. It wasn't about breaking in by force. It was about infiltrating with intelligence, recovering what the hospital had tried to erase. The first phase was to secure credentials. With the help of a former colleague who still trusted her in secret, she obtained an access card that would let her enter as if she were part of the night support staff. The risk was huge. If anyone recognized her, all her effort would collapse. But she knew there was no other way. On the chosen night, Elena entered the hospital with her heart racing. The atmosphere was the same as always: cold lights, silent halls, the smell of disinfectant. But for her, every step was different, filled with adrenaline. She carried a small encrypted drive where she planned to save the key files. Her main target was the internal servers, located in an administrative office. She knew they contained patient databases, billing, and surgical records, documents that had been manipulated to protect the surgeon, but that still held traces of the alterations. Timing everything down to the second, she got inside. Her hands trembled as she plugged in the device and navigated menus she knew by heart. Among lines of numbers and hidden files, she found what she was looking for: deleted records that could still be restored, inflated invoices that matched the supplier she had tracked in exile, and, most shocking of all, altered death reports meant to erase medical negligence. As the files downloaded, she heard footsteps in the hallway. A cold sweat ran down her back. She hid behind a shelf and held her breath. A guard walked slowly past, unaware of her presence. When he left, silence became her only ally once again. She resumed the download and secured the files on her drive, duplicating everything to the cloud she had set up with the journalist. She didn't stop there. She also entered the physical archives, where paper documents were still stored. She flipped through folders, quickly photographed pages with her phone, and collected copies of fake surgeries and fictitious purchases. She knew every second increased the risk, but her conviction was stronger than fear. When she finally left the hospital at dawn, the fresh air felt like victory. She had put her safety on the line, but she had done it. She now held the ultimate proof. These were no longer rumors or suspicions. It was the hospital's own voice speaking through undeniable documents. Elena handed copies to the lawyer and the journalist. Together they verified the authenticity of the material and organized it into a clear dossier, impossible to ignore. For the first time, the balance seemed to tilt in her favor. The system had tried to erase her, but now she was the one returning with the truth, ready to bring down the facade of the untouchable doctor. On the morning of the hearing, every step Elena took reminded her of all she had lost and, at the same time, all she was about to regain. The hospital, the same one that had expelled and defamed her, was now forced to open its doors for an inevitable meeting, the presentation of evidence before the board of directors. It wasn't a polite invitation, but the result of undeniable pressure. The documents leaked by the journalist had sparked a media storm that could no longer be ignored. The hospital had no choice but to call an extraordinary session. The boardroom was filled with tense faces, executives, lawyers, patient representatives, and medical staff. At the center sat the untouchable surgeon, immaculate as always, his expression confident to the point of arrogance. He had spent years building his image of excellence, convinced that nothing could ever damage it. Elena entered with the lawyer by her side. She carried a carefully organized dossier, recovered digital records, inflated invoices, patient testimonies, and, above all, the deleted files she had rescued from the hospital system. The tension in the room was thick. For a moment, the silence felt like a rope stretched to its breaking point. The lawyer spoke first, presenting each document with precision. These weren't assumptions, not guesses. They were direct evidence. Invoices showing charges for materials that never existed. Medical histories altered to hide mistakes. Death certificates rewritten. And most damning of all, electronic records proving modifications made from the surgeon's own account. Each page landed like a hammer on the table, breaking down the facade of perfection. The doctor tried to defend himself. He spoke of misunderstandings, administrative errors, of a campaign against him. But the evidence was too clear. The journalist, allowed to attend as an observer, wrote down every word. His steady gaze was a reminder that nothing said here would stay within these walls. It would reach the public. As more evidence was presented, the masks began to fall. Some board members who had once defended the surgeon with confidence now looked uneasy. They exchanged glances, aware that the cover-up was about to be exposed. The weight of truth was impossible to contain. The turning point came when Elena spoke. With a steady voice, she described how she discovered the anomalies, how she was fired and silenced, how she endured slander and threats. She did not speak with bitterness, but with the calm of someone who knows the truth is on her side. Every sentence was a testimony of resilience, a reminder that ethics can endure even when everything seems lost. For the first time, the surgeon lost his composure. He slammed the table, shouted denials, and accused Elena of lying. But the more he raged, the clearer his desperation became. The contrast was undeniable. The calm of the nurse against the fury of a man trapped. By the end of the session, the board could no longer maintain silence. They admitted the evidence was incontestable and announced the immediate opening of disciplinary and legal proceedings against the surgeon. The news spread quickly. The untouchable figure had fallen. The corruption once hidden beneath prestige and power now stood exposed before all. For Elena, this was not a personal victory, but a vindication for all the forgotten patients, for all the silenced voices. The hospital could no longer hide what it had long protected. The truth had finally found its way out. The board's verdict was only the beginning of a chain of consequences that spread like ripples in water. The untouchable doctor, long protected by prestige and connections, was immediately suspended. The evidence was so clear that not even his most loyal allies dared defend him publicly. The news reached the media quickly. Newspaper headlines spoke of medical corruption, covered-up deaths, and millions lost in fake purchases. Elena's story went from being a crushed rumor to front-page national news. The surgeon now faced not only an internal disciplinary process, but also a criminal investigation. The prosecutor's office opened a case against him, based on the dossier delivered by the lawyer and reinforced by the journalist's publications. The circle of impunity around him began to crumble. Executives who had once kept silent were called to testify, and some tried to negotiate reduced sentences in exchange for cooperation. The machinery of silence was breaking apart. At the same time, reforms were introduced within the hospital. Social pressure was so strong that health authorities were forced to intervene. New transparency protocols were set, external audits reviewed purchases and records, and an independent ethics office was created. For the first time in years, the hospital hallways felt different. More watched, more aware, less untouchable. For Elena, all of this was a victory, but not one celebrated with joy. She had regained her name, yes, but at a very high cost. Her career had been scarred. Her nights were still filled with insomnia, and the emotional wounds of slander and threats were not easy to heal. Though some colleagues came back with late apologies, she knew the emptiness of isolation would never fully fade. The patients, however, gave her strength. Many sought her out to thank her. Families who had lost loved ones felt that, because of her, their pain had not been in vain. Mothers held her hands with tears in their eyes, telling her that her fight had honored the memory of those who were gone. Those gestures became the true recognition, far more valuable than any headline. The journalist published a series of reports with great impact. He not only exposed the surgeon's corruption, but also highlighted the courage of a nurse who, despite loneliness and fear, chose truth. His articles spread widely, and were even translated in international forums on health and medical ethics. Elena became an involuntary symbol, a voice reminding the world of the importance of integrity in hospitals. The lawyer, meanwhile, continued to stand by her side during the legal processes. She knew the battle wasn't over. The doctor and his attorney searched for every loophole to delay justice. But the landscape had changed. What once was an unbreakable wall of complicity was now an open path, cleared by social pressure and undeniable proof. Elena tried to return to nursing. It wasn't easy. Though she had regained her reputation, the marks of persecution still lingered in some institutions. But she found a place in a small clinic, where she was welcomed not as a threat, but as a professional with experience and courage. There, she discovered she could wear her uniform again without the weight of the past. Though each time she walked down a hospital corridor, memories of what she had lived returned in waves. In quiet moments, Elena thought about everything she had gone through. Discovering the anomalies, the loneliness after her dismissal, the nights in exile, the risk of sneaking back in, the public confrontation, and finally, justice. She didn't see it as a heroic epic, but as the inevitable consequence of her conscience. She could have stayed silent, like so many others, but she chose to speak. That decision, though it cost her tears and fear, also transformed a system that had seemed unbreakable. The story didn't end with a perfect happy ending. The surgeon was still appealing, the emotional scars persisted, and the hospital continued struggling with the shadow of its past. But something had changed forever. The certainty that silence was no longer absolute, that a single voice could spark the collapse of impunity. Elena, standing by the window of her new workplace, looked out at the city at dusk. She knew her life would never be the same, but she also understood she had achieved what once seemed impossible, restoring dignity to forgotten patients and reclaiming her name. With her uniform on and her gaze steady, she took a deep breath and thought that, despite everything, it had been worth it. Elena's fight reminds us that truth may take time, but it always finds its way. A nurse who was silenced, defamed, and expelled managed to break down the wall of corruption with evidence, allies, and courage. Her story is also a reflection of many who face power and silence. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in her place? Would you have had the same courage to speak up, even if it meant losing everything? Share your thoughts in the comments, because every voice adds to this debate about ethics, justice, and humanity. And if this story moved you as much as it did me while telling it, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss more stories like this, and leave a like so we can keep creating content that inspires, moves, and makes us reflect. Your support is the strength that keeps this community alive.